Dear friends from afar, has the pandemic not prevented us from meeting? My interest in the summit, which is such a generous topic, the role of youth in peacemaking, would have been not entirely in being a keynote speaker, but in listening to the opinions of the young participants. That is because the world they will be building will also be the world in which my own children and grandchildren will be living. In over the 4 decades, I spent as a university professor. As I grew older and as times changed, I struggled to understand what my students were thinking, all of them of the same age, 18, 19 years old. I do not know how much today's youth would be interested in experiences such as mine. A man who as a child witnessed the death and mutilation of people during the Second World War, whose youth was spent under a criminal dictatorship that could at any time send you to prison, forced labor camps, or outright deport you for political reasons. And who in maturity took part in a peaceful revolt that was bloodily repressed by the armed forces in Romania in December 1989. And ultimately, one who dedicated his life to promoting peace and understanding worldwide. All these events of contemporary history might seem to today's youngsters a story of long ago, not understanding for today's world, which is confronted with other challenges. The pandemic affected young and old people alike and brought to the fore 2 fundamental values, life and freedom, which we tend to remember once lost. It is the same with healthcare. I appreciate the programmatic documents promoted by the United Nations organizations such as the Agenda 2030, but I am not sure how convincing they can be for today's youth, as they are elaborated by experts who were not faced with the horrors of war, hunger, refuge, or with the inferno of prison and concentration camps. In order to reach a consensus to qualify war as a crime against humanity, which annuls one right to life, one needs a profound change in societal conscience regarding violence in interhuman relations. The dominance of violence is deeply rooted in collective psychology. The history of mankind from the earliest times glorified war heroes instead of peace heroes. In this condition, it is hard to believe that my plea for a culture of peace can be successful. I think that the isolation imposed by the pandemic provided unhoped for occasion to revisit literary masterpieces that address in the manner of the artistic genius mind both sense and reason. And I say this because I am convinced that the power of books is greater than that of political speech. It was during the time that I reread 2 novels that have influenced my youth, War and Peace and The Magic Mountain. Tolstoy sends the reader to the time of the Napoleonic Wars, which involved the whole of Europe in the beginning of the 19th century, while Thomas Mann focuses on the First World War at the beginning of the 20th. Throughout the history of mankind, the first victim of wars, be they world wars, European wars, regional, interstate, or civil wars, caused by the ruler desire for power, are the young. It is not easy to forget the harrowing scene in War and Peace when Napoleon was inspecting the sinister post-battle landscape of the Pratzen Hills, strewn with the bodies of the dead and wounded with a young and moribund Prince Bolkonsky, having someone might bring him back to the life, which, having now understood it differently, seemed so wonderful in comparison. Just as harrowing as the final chapters of The Magic Mountain, where a regiment of student volunteers must decide the fate of the attack of the trenches and the burning villages. 3,000 strong Thomas Mann writers saw that only 2,000, after heavy losses, be left standing to salute victory through a heartfelt hooray, without sparing those for those who, in falling, will have been left behind. I believe these scenes should be ingrained into the memory of all those who planned for war, suffering, and bloodshed. In 1943, in the midst of World War II, the most terrible military confrontation in history, the German writer Hermann Hesse published a book that describes a peaceful world in which armed confrontation are mere memory. The Glass Big Bang, for which Hermann Hesse received the Nobel Prize for Literature at the end of the war in 1946, proposed a model of a society founded on culture and not on violence, and glorifies the valencies of cultural dialogue, in which the author argues the differences in culture, education, talent, and individually are not a reason to give up from understanding one another. Unlike the political utopias of Thomas More or Campanella, Hesse's novel does not suggest an isolation from, but on the contrary, rather an involvement in the life of the world, beyond the peaceful borders of imaginary Castalia, with the danger of self-sufficiency lurking from behind. We might ask ourselves, why, after the spectacular development of intercultural dialogue during the last decades, humankind is presently facing so many challenges, freezing adversities, and the spiral of violence? In my opinion, the culture of peace is something more than mere intercultural dialogue, and its construction requires more time and more perseverance. It is about a lifelong learning process from early childhood until old age. We cannot neglect the fact that the culture of peace cannot be separate from a new culture of democracy and even from a new culture of the market economy. The culture of peace is also difficult to build because in the late 20th and early 21st century, the need for education was replaced by the need for entertainment, as entertainment brings money, while education does not. Mass killings, genocide, rape, destructions are breaking news, while humanitarian action never are. If this reality will not change, it might be that some of the children now raised and educated in the spirit of violence will migrate, even without any ideological or religious motivation, to those spaces that have become a kind of reservations where manhunts and killing and torturing people are allowed, encouraged, praised, and made popular. The traders in violent images are just as responsible as the weapons traders, because both their motivations are the same: profit and money. I think that when we blame religions for the current open conflict and for all the frozen conflict, we should remember, before condemning them for the evils committed in their name, that they too preach peace and not war. The path they point to is to love your neighbor and not kill or oppress them. Even if in the long history of mankind, one marked by extreme violence, this fate remained merely a dream, one must not lose hope. Maybe a new generation will turn it into reality. In order for this to happen, we, the elders, as a representative of the academic milieu or as experienced professionals in any field of activity, must perform an exercise in self-knowledge in order to identify those values that help us in fighting evil and discovering good. We have the duty to help the young discover for themselves the values of humanity and to make them their own in order to build themselves ideals that can converge towards the greater good. Thank you.